The first gray light of morning had barely begun to creep through the trees when the sound shattered the stillness of my cabin. It wasn't the usual forest noises, not the rustle of leaves or the distant call of an early bird. This was something else entirely. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. A whimper. Not the playful yip of a happy dog or the excited bark of a pet greeting its owner. This was the kind of sound that bypasses your ears and goes straight to your gut. Raw, guttural, and carrying a weight of desperation that immediately had me bolting upright in bed. I sat frozen for a heartbeat, listening. The old cabin creaked around me, its wooden bones settling in the cool dawn air. My first thought was a wounded animal, maybe a deer that had tangled with a coyote. But then it came again, closer this time, right outside my front door. The sound was unmistakable now. A canine whine, but deeper, more urgent than any domestic dog I'd ever heard. There was a roughness to it, like the voice behind it had been worn raw from crying out. I moved without thinking, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. The rifle above the door caught my eye as I passed, but something about that sound made me leave it hanging there. The door protested as I pulled it open, the ancient hinges groaning their usual complaint. And there she was. A dog. At least, I thought it was a dog at first glance. She stood on my porch like a ghost materializing from the morning mist, her form backlit by the pale dawn light. The details came to me in flashes as my sleep-addled brain struggled to process what I was seeing. A blood-streaked muzzle, the dark stains standing out stark against her golden-brown fur. Ears that lay flat against her skull, not in aggression, but in exhaustion. A coat that might have been beautiful once, now matted with mud and something darker. Blood, yes, but also the greasy filth of living rough. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. They weren't wild with fear like a cornered animal. They didn't plead like a lost pet. They simply commanded, held mine with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. There was an intelligence there, a silent communication that bypassed words entirely. "Look," those eyes said. "See what I've brought you." And then I noticed the small bundle at her feet. A puppy. No bigger than my two hands put together, its fur a lighter shade than its mother's, but just as filthy. It lay completely still, its tiny sides not moving, one paw twisted at an angle that made my stomach clench. The mother dog didn't nudge it, didn't lick it, just stood there, her gaze never leaving mine, waiting. The morning air was crisp against my skin, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker began its rhythmic knocking. Normal forest sounds that somehow made the scene on my porch feel even more surreal. I realized I was holding my breath. The logical part of my brain, the part that had lived alone in these woods for 6 years, screamed at me to shut the door. Strays could be dangerous. They carried disease. They bit. But something deeper, something primal, kept me rooted in place. The mother dog took a single step forward, her claws clicking softly on the weathered wood. She moved with obvious pain, her right hind leg barely touching the ground. Up close, I could see the way her ribs stood out beneath her matted fur, the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. This was an animal on the edge, of starvation, of exhaustion, of something worse. Yet she'd come here, brought her dying pup to my doorstep. The puppy hadn't moved. Its tiny chest remained still, its fur damp with dew or something worse. I found myself crouching without conscious thought, my hands hovering over the small body. The mother didn't growl, didn't snap, just watched. My fingers brushed the puppy's side. Cold. Too cold. But then, a twitch, so slight I might have imagined it. The mother dog's ears pricked forward, her entire body tensing. She'd seen it too. I pressed 2 fingers gently against the puppy's chest, feeling through the matted fur. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. Then, there. The faintest flutter, like the last ember of a dying fire. The mother dog made a sound then, a soft woof of air through her nose. When I looked up, her gaze had changed. The command was still there, but beneath it, something else. Something that looked dangerously like hope. The trees around us were coming alive with morning bird song. A breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of coming rain. Normal things, everyday things. But this was anything but normal. A wild creature, because I was certain now this was no one's lost pet, had brought her dying young to my doorstep, had looked me in the eye and silently asked for help. And somehow, against all reason, I was going to give it. I scooped the puppy up as gently as I could, cradling its limp form against my chest. It weighed nothing, its body heat barely noticeable through my thin shirt. The mother dog didn't move, didn't try to stop me, just watched as I backed slowly into the cabin. At the threshold I hesitated. "Come on," I said softly, nodding toward the interior. She didn't follow, just settled onto her haunches, her golden eyes never leaving the bundle in my arms. Guarding, waiting. As I closed the door, the last thing I saw was those eyes, gleaming in the dawn light, still holding that impossible mix of command and trust. The puppy stirred weakly against my chest, its tiny claws catching in my shirt. Somewhere outside, the mother dog let out a single, soft whine. And just like that, my quiet morning, my quiet life, was irrevocably changed. The moment stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. Me standing frozen in the doorway, the dog unwavering on my porch, her pup a motionless bundle at her feet. My pulse hammered in my throat, each beat a drum roll to a decision I wasn't ready to make. Every survival instinct I'd honed in these woods screamed at me to slam the door. Strays were unpredictable. They carried parasites, rabies, infections that could turn a simple scratch into a week of fevered delirium. Last winter, a neighbor 2 ridges over had needed stitches after trying to help a friendly stray that turned out to be anything but. And this wasn't just any stray. This was a wild thing, her muscles coiled tight beneath that scarred coat, her presence alone rewriting the rules of this morning. Yet, her gaze. It wasn't the frantic stare of a cornered animal, not the glassy-eyed panic of a creature backed into a wall. It was something else entirely, something that cut through the noise in my head like a knife. She looked at me the way the old maple in my yard looked at the sky before a storm. Rooted, inevitable, like she'd carved her place into this moment long before I'd opened the door. And in that look, a silent ultimatum. You can turn away, but you won't. The puppy lay between us, its fur matted with dirt and something darker. Blood, maybe. Or worse. Its ribs barely moved. One ear was torn at the tip, the wound fresh enough to glisten in the pale morning light. I swallowed hard. The dog didn't blink, didn't growl, just held my stare as if she already knew the shape of the war raging inside me. The part that wanted to shut this out, lock the door, and pretend I hadn't seen anything, versus the part that couldn't unsee the way her sides hitched with every breath. The way her claws dug into the wood like she was holding herself upright through sheer will. A gust of wind rattled the trees behind her, sending a shower of pine needles skittering across the porch. The scent of rain and damp earth rushed in, thick and heavy. Storm coming. The puppy twitched. Just a flicker of movement, so small I might have missed it if the mother hadn't reacted. Her ears snapping forward, her entire body tensing like a bowstring. That tiny motion undid me. I exhaled, long and slow, and stepped back. The dog didn't move at first, just watched, her nostrils flaring as she scented the air between us. Testing. Waiting. Then, a single deliberate nudge of her muzzle against the puppy's side. The pup didn't respond, but she didn't seem to expect it to. Instead, she lifted her head, met my eyes one last time, and sat. Not submissive, not pleading, just waiting. As if she'd already decided how this would go. As if my choice had been made the second she'd stepped onto my porch. The silence between us was deafening. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, the sound sharp and mocking. The first drops of rain began to patter against the roof. I crouched, my knees protesting against the cold wood. The puppy was smaller up close, its fur clumped with mud and what looked like burrs. Its breathing was so shallow I had to press my fingers to its side to feel it. The mother didn't stop me, didn't so much as twitch. Just sat there, her gaze heavy on my hands as I gingerly gathered the pup into my arms. It was lighter than it should have been, its body heat barely a whisper against my skin. I hesitated at the threshold, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "You coming?" I asked, nodding toward the inside. She didn't move, just watched as I backed into the cabin, her golden eyes unreadable in the dim light. When I shut the door, she was still there, a shadow against the gathering storm, her outline blurred by the rain now sheeting down, waiting, always waiting. And just like that, the choice was made. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the world narrowed to three things. 1. The icy weight of the puppy in my arms. 2. The frantic hammering of my own pulse. 3. The muffled scratch, scratch, scratch of claws against the porch outside. The pup was colder than the bathroom tiles when I laid it down. Not the crisp chill of something left in the shade, but the deep, unnatural cold of a creature slipping away. Its ribs pressed against my palms like a bundle of twigs wrapped in damp cloth. I fumbled through the medicine cabinet with one hand, the other keeping pressure on the worst of the wounds. A jagged gash along the pup's hind leg, crusted with dirt and dried blood. The antiseptic bottle slipped from my grip, rolling across the floor with a hollow plastic clatter. No time. No time for gloves, for proper sterilization, for second-guessing. I grabbed the nearest towel, an old threadbare thing I used for wiping down tools, and folded it into a makeshift nest beside the space heater. The machine whined as it powered up, its orange coils glowing to life with a smell of burning dust. The pup didn't react when I pressed a warm washcloth to its matted fur. Its breathing was so shallow I had to keep checking with 2 fingers beneath its jaw. The gash on its leg wept fresh blood when I cleaned it, the dark red standing out stark against the yellowed towel. Not deep enough to hit an artery, but deep enough. Outside, the scratching stopped. A pause. Then, thump. The sound of a heavy body settling against the door. I didn't need to look to know she was still there. Could feel it in the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath, in the occasional shift of weight that made the floorboards creak beneath the door frame. The pup's nose was dry and cracked when I dabbed it with a wet cloth. Its tongue, when I pried its jaws open to check for obstructions, was pale pink, tacky with dehydration. I reached for the honey, the old bear remedy Mark had sworn by last hunting season, and mixed it with warm water in a chipped measuring cup. First drop, nothing. Second drop, the faintest twitch of its whiskers. Third drop, a weak swallow. "Attaboy," I whispered, though I didn't know if it was male or female. Didn't matter. What mattered was the microscopic rise of its chest when I held my palm over its ribs. What mattered was the way its claws, tiny needle-sharp things, flexed weakly against the towel. I worked in silence, the only sounds the hum of the heater and the occasional shuffle outside. The pup's fur slowly dried into soft curls as I cleaned it, revealing a coat the color of wet sand with darker streaks along its spine. Its ears, once flattened with filth, perked slightly at the edges. The wound took longer, dirt packed deep. I flushed it with saline, my hands steady despite the way my gut twisted at each pained jerk of the pup's leg. It whimpered once, a sound so small it barely registered, and outside, The mother answered with a low, questioning whine. I froze. The pup's nose twitched. Its ears, still too big for its head, pivoted toward the door. For one suspended moment, the three of us existed in perfect, terrible harmony. The mother, waiting beyond the door. The pup, trembling on the edge of consciousness. Me, caught between them with blood on my hands, and no idea what came next. Then the moment broke. The pup's head lolled to the side, its breathing evening out into something closer to sleep than unconsciousness. Outside, the mother resumed her vigil, her presence reduced to the occasional sigh of breath beneath the door crack. I sat back on my heels, staring at the small creature curled in my towel nest. Its paws twitched in some dream, its injured leg drawn tight against its body. The heater cast flickering shadows across its ribs, still too prominent, but no longer looking quite so much like a skeleton wrapped in fur. Somewhere around dawn, when the gray light began seeping through the curtains, I realized two things. 1. The scratching had stopped too. The pup was warm to the touch. I cracked the door open, half expecting an empty porch. But she was still there, curled into a tight circle right where I'd left her, her muzzle resting on her paws. Her eyes snapped open the second the hinges creaked, locking onto mine with that same unnerving intensity. For a long moment we just looked at each other. Then, slowly, deliberately, I held up the pup, cleaner now, its fur fluffed from the towel, its leg neatly bandaged. The mother dog didn't move, didn't whine, just studied the pup with an expression I couldn't name, her ears twitching at each tiny breath her offspring took. When I closed the door again, she didn't scratch, just settled back into her watch. And for the first time since I'd opened the door to that broken whimper, I let myself believe this might not end in tragedy. The honey water glistened at the rim of the teaspoon, catching the morning light that filtered through the dusty kitchen window. I held my breath as I tilted it toward the pup's muzzle, watching the golden droplet tremble on the edge before falling. It landed on the pup's black nose, clinging there for a heartbeat, before sliding down the slope toward its tightly closed mouth. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. The tiniest pink tongue darted out, barely more than a tremor, licking at the sweetness. The pup's nostrils flared once, twice, its whiskers twitching like delicate sensors, calibrating to this new stimulus. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until the sound escaped me. Something between a laugh and a sob, rough from disuse and the long sleepless night. The unexpected noise startled us both. The pup's ears, one still crusted with dirt at the tip, twitched backward, and my own shoulders tensed. Through the warped glass of the kitchen window, movement caught my eye. The mother. She stood at the tree line exactly where she'd been since dawn, her coat steaming slightly in the morning chill. The rising sun painted streaks of copper in her brown fur, highlighting the scars along her flank, old wounds that told stories I couldn't read. Her ears were pricked forward, her entire body still as a statue except for the faint plume of breath from her nostrils. She didn't growl at my outburst, didn't blink at the sudden noise. Just watched. I dipped the spoon again, this time angling it carefully between the pup's parted teeth. The honey water pooled on its tongue, and this time, a swallow. Actual, deliberate movement. The pup's throat bobbed weakly, its front paws kneading at the towel beneath it in some instinctive rhythm. Outside, the mother dog took a single step forward, then stopped herself, her muscles quivering with restrained energy. We were negotiating without words, she and I. Every drop accepted was a point in my favor. Every twitch of life from the pup was a term added to our unspoken contract. I could see the calculations in her eyes each time our gazes met through the window, measuring, assessing whether this hairless, clumsy creature could be trusted with something so precious. The third spoonful brought the first real reaction. The pup's tail thumped once against the towel, the movement so sudden it startled another wet chuckle from me. This time, the mother's head cocked slightly to one side, her ears rotating forward like satellite dishes tuning into a frequency only she could hear. I found myself speaking before I realized it. "He likes it," I murmured, as if explaining myself to the wild creature outside my window. "The honey, it's good for shock." The words sounded absurd aloud. What did this seasoned survivor care about human remedies? Yet she didn't retreat at the sound of my voice. If anything, she seemed to lean infinitesimally closer, her dark eyes tracking every movement inside the kitchen. By the fifth spoonful, a rhythm developed. 1, dip, 2, drip, 3, swallow 4, pause. The pauses grew shorter each time. The pup's tongue grew more insistent, now actively seeking the spoon instead of passively accepting what fell into its mouth. Its eyes, which had been half-lidded and glassy, began to focus, the brown irises clearing as the honey worked its slow magic. Outside, the mother dog settled onto her haunches, her posture relaxing incrementally with each successful swallow. She no longer looked ready to charge through the glass. Now she simply observed, a silent partner in this fragile rehabilitation. When the pup finally turned its head away from the 10th spoonful, a clear refusal, I sat back on my heels, the empty jar of honey catching the light beside me. The creature before me was still far from healthy, still trembling with weakness, but something fundamental had changed. It had chosen to stop. That simple act of will, of asserting its own limits, spoke volumes. Outside, the mother dog seemed to sense it too. She rose smoothly to her feet, shook out her coat with a ripple of muscle, and for the first time since arriving, looked away from the window. Her gaze turned toward the woods, then back to me. One last, lingering look. Then she turned and vanished between the trees, her tail flicking once behind her. Not gone for good, I could feel that in my bones. Just trusting me enough to step away. For now. The pup sighed deeply beside me, its body curling into the towel as sleep finally claimed it. The spoon clattered quietly against the honey jar as I set it down, my fingers sticky with the remnants of our strange breakfast. Through the window the morning sun climbed higher, painting the trees in gold. Somewhere in those woods, a mother waited. And in my kitchen, our unspoken deal held firm. For this moment at least, we were all exactly where we needed to be. The rumble of Larry's pickup announced his arrival before the crunch of gravel under tires did. I recognized the sound, that particular growl of an engine that had needed new mufflers for the better part of a decade. The timing couldn't have been worse. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the pup nestled in the hollow of my sweatshirt where I'd tucked it against my chest. Its warmth seeped through the fabric, a living, breathing weight that rose and fell in steady rhythm now. Outside, the mother dog was nowhere to be seen. She'd melted into the tree line an hour ago, though I could feel her presence like a held breath in the air. The truck door slammed. Heavy boots hit dirt. "Mike, you home?" Larry's voice carried through the thin walls, that particular blend of forced cheer and underlying suspicion that meant he'd come bearing gossip thinly veiled as neighborly concern. I hesitated, glancing down at the bulge in my sweatshirt. The pup stirred but didn't wake, its nose twitching at some dream's scent. Too late to hide it now. Larry was already on the porch, his shadow darkening the screen door. I saw the exact moment he noticed. His gaze dropped to my chest, to the unnatural shape there, and his bushy eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "What in the Sam Hill?" He didn't wait for an invitation. The screen door screeched open, and suddenly Larry filled my kitchen with the smell of motor oil and chewing tobacco. Up close, I could see the fresh grease stains on his flannel, the way his fingers, stubby and permanently grimed, twitched at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. His eyes locked onto the bit of fur visible at the neckline of my sweatshirt. "That ain't no squirrel," he said. The pup chose that moment to stretch, its tiny paws pressing against my ribs through the fabric. Larry took a step back, his boots scuffing against the linoleum. Jesus wept. "Is that a dog?" I didn't answer. Just shifted slightly, turning my body away from his reaching hand. The movement made Larry's eyes narrow. "Where'd you get it?" The question hung between us, loaded. Outside, a branch snapped in the woods. Neither of us turned to look. "Mother left it on my porch," I said finally. Larry's face did something complicated, twisting through surprise, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Brown bitch? Gold eyes? Got a scar running down her left flank?" The description was eerily accurate. I nodded. Larry swore violently, the color draining from his ruddy cheeks. He backed up until his hips hit the kitchen counter, his fingers gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "That's the junkyard bitch," he spat. The words thick with something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't not fear either. "She's killed before. Tore up a kid last winter over by the old Miller place." The accusation hit like a bucket of ice water. The pup in my sweatshirt squirmed, reacting to the sudden tension in my muscles. I forced my hands to relax, to keep my voice even when I spoke. "You sure it was her?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer Larry could have given. It filled the kitchen, pressing against the walls, carrying with it all the unspoken history of a small town, where stories hardened into facts through repetition alone. Larry's gaze dropped to my chest again, to the living proof that contradicted his claims. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he pushed off the counter, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. "Just watch your back," he muttered, already halfway to the door. "That ain't no ordinary dog." The screen door banged shut behind him. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as he peeled out of my driveway, leaving behind only the faint smell of exhaust and the weight of his warning. I looked down at the pup. It had settled back into sleep, its tiny face smooth and unbothered by Larry's dramatics. Outside, the trees stood silent and still. But as I turned back to the sink, I caught a flash of movement in the periphery of my vision. A shadow detaching itself from the tree line, slipping between the trunks with soundless grace. Watching. Always watching. The digital clock on the stove glowed an eerie green in the pitch-black kitchen. 3:07 a.m. A time that existed outside normal hours, when the world seemed to hold its breath between one day and the next. I sat slumped at the kitchen table, my spine protesting the hard wooden chair, my eyelids sandpaper heavy. The pup lay curled in the nest of towels I'd arranged in a cardboard box near the heater, its breathing steady but shallow. Then, a whimper. Not the sleepy grumbles of a dreaming dog, but a sharp, distressed sound that jolted me fully awake before it even finished echoing through the dark. I was moving before conscious thought, my chair scraping loudly against the floor as I crossed to the box in 2 strides. The pup was trembling violently, its small body racked with shivers no amount of blankets could soothe. Its eyes were wide open, the whites showing all around in the dim green glow of the stove light. Fear. Pure animal fear. Its paws scrabbled against the cardboard, claws catching and tearing as it tried desperately to escape some unseen terror. "Hey! Hey! Easy now!" My voice came out rough with sleep, but the pup's ears twitched toward the sound anyway. I reached in slowly, giving it time to smell me, to recognize. Its nose was dry and hot, too hot, when it pressed against my fingers. Without thinking, I gathered it up, cradling the trembling body against my chest, where it could feel my heartbeat. The moment my skin made contact with its fur, the pup stilled. Its frantic panting hitched, then evened out incrementally. Its muscles remained tense, coiled like springs, but the worst of the tremors subsided. I didn't realize I was humming until the pup's head tilted slightly, one ear cocking toward the vibration in my chest. Some half-remembered lullaby my mother used to sing, the notes wandering aimlessly without any real melody. It didn't matter. The pup's eyelids fluttered, its breathing deepening as the song worked its inexplicable magic. Outside, a shadow moved. I caught the motion through the window above the sink, a darker shape against the night, pacing the edge of the porch with silent, restless energy. The mother. She'd been gone for hours, off hunting or patrolling or whatever wild dogs did in the dead of night. Now she was back, her movements agitated, her body a tense outline in the moonlight. The pup stiffened in my arms, its nose twitching. It had caught her scent on the air seeping through the old window frames. I felt its tiny heart kick against my palm, its attention riveted to the window, though it couldn't possibly see out from this angle. Slowly, carefully, I shifted toward the sink, turning so the pup could see. The moment stretched as mother and pup locked onto each other through the glass. The pup still trembling in my arms, the mother's statue still on the porch. Moonlight silvered her scarred muzzle, glinted off the watchful gold of her eyes. She didn't growl, didn't scratch at the door, just watched. Then, impossibly, she lowered her head. Just once. Just enough to be deliberate. A nod, an acknowledgement, a passing of the torch. When she melted back into the trees, her departure was so silent I might have imagined it, if not for the way the pup sighed in my arms, its body going boneless with sudden, exhausted relief. Its head drooped against my chest, its breathing finally deep and even. I stood there long after the pup had fallen asleep, staring at the empty porch where the mother had been. The digital clock ticked over to 3:42 a.m. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, its mournful cry echoing through the pines. The pup's warmth seeped into my skin, a living, breathing weight that anchored me to this strange, sleepless night. Outside, the woods were still again, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that she was still out there, watching, waiting, trusting. And somehow that trust felt heavier than any responsibility I'd ever known. The rumble of the diesel engine didn't belong in my quiet mountain driveway. I knew it before I even looked up from where I knelt in the dirt, the morning sun warm on my back as I checked the pup's healing leg. That sound, the throaty idle of a government vehicle, sent a cold ripple down my spine before I even turned my head. The truck was exactly what I expected. White, boxy, with County Animal Control stenciled in no-nonsense black letters along the side. The door creaked open, and boots hit gravel. Heavy, official boots attached to a woman in a khaki uniform, with her hair pulled back so tight, it stretched the skin around her eyes. Deputy Morales. I'd met her exactly once before, when a black bear had gotten into Mrs. Henderson's trash cans last spring. She'd been all business then too, her voice flat and her eyes missing nothing. Now those eyes locked onto the pup at my feet. The little thing had grown stronger over the past few days, its legs finally sturdy enough to support its rounded belly as it tottered around the yard. It had discovered the joy of chewing. My shoelaces, the frayed edges of the porch steps, the low-hanging branches of the juniper bush. Currently, it was gnawing enthusiastically on my right bootlace, its tiny tail wagging in erratic circles as it growled playfully at the stubborn knot. Morales didn't smile. "You're housing strays." Not a question. An accusation. I straightened slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. The pup barely noticed, too engrossed in its battle with the lace. "Just one," I said. "And not by choice." Morales's gaze flicked to the tree line, where I knew the mother watched, even if I couldn't see her. "Two," she corrected. The adult's been spotted on your property every night this week." The pup chose that moment to finally triumph over the shoelace, the knot giving way with a small, proud yip. It tumbled backward, then immediately pounced forward again, attacking the newly freed ends with renewed vigor. Morales's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened incrementally. Just for a second. Then the clipboard was in her hands, the pen clicking authoritatively. Harboring unvaccinated strays is illegal, especially ones with a history of aggression. I stiffened. "She's not aggressive." The pen paused. Morales looked up, one eyebrow arched. "Your neighbor Larry seems to disagree." The image of Larry's panicked face flashed through my mind. Of course he'd called. The pup, sensing the shift in mood, abandoned the shoelace and wobbled over to press itself against my ankle, its warm little body trembling slightly. I reached down without thinking, my fingers finding the spot behind its ears that always calmed it. Morales watched the interaction, her dark eyes unreadable. The clipboard hung between us like a guillotine. Finally she sighed. The sound was heavy, the sigh of someone who'd had this conversation too many times before. 3 days, she said, clicking the pen shut. "Get them licensed, get them vaccinated, or we take them." The pup let out a small whine, pressing closer to my leg. Somewhere in the trees, a branch cracked, too loud to be anything small. Morales heard it too. Her head turned slightly, her eyes scanning the dense foliage. For a long moment we all stood frozen, me, the deputy, the pup, and the unseen presence in the woods. Then the clipboard snapped shut. 3 days, she repeated, turning back to the truck. "Your choice." The engine roared to life, the sound sending the pup scrambling into the safety of my shadow. We watched together as the truck reversed down the driveway, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after the taillights had disappeared. Only then did I allow myself to look at the tree line. She was there, of course, just a glimpse of golden eyes between the leaves, a shadow among shadows, watching, waiting, understanding. The pup whined again, its nose twitching toward the woods. I knelt, running a hand down its back, feeling the rapid flutter of its heartbeat beneath my palm. 3 days. The clock was ticking. The hinges groaned as I pushed the back door wider than it had been in years, the wood sticking slightly from disuse. Morning sunlight spilled across the warped floorboards, illuminating dust motes that swirled in the sudden draft. The screen door was worse. Its spring long since rusted into silence. So it simply hung open at an awkward angle, a gaping mouth breathing in the pine-scented air. A test. Not for me. Not really. For her. The mother dog stood exactly where she had every morning for the past week, at the precise edge where the tree line met the clearing, one paw slightly raised, her body poised between approach and retreat. The morning light gilded her scars, turning the ragged fur along her flank into strands of copper wire. Her nose worked the air, sorting through the scents: fresh coffee, the lingering tang of last night's stew, the unmistakable musk of her pup. Inside, the puppy had gone utterly still at the creak of the door. I watched from the kitchen table as its ears pricked forward, its entire body vibrating with sudden awareness. It had been dozing in its now customary spot beneath my chair, curled on the old bath mat I'd repurposed as its bed. Now it scrambled upright so fast it nearly toppled over, its claws clicking frantically against the linoleum as it oriented itself toward the open door. The moment stretched. The pup took its first wobbling step, then another. Its tail, still slightly too large for its body, swayed like a metronome set to allegro. Halfway across the kitchen, it paused, glancing back at me with eyes that held a question I couldn't answer. I stayed perfectly still. That was all the permission it needed. What followed was the most heartbreakingly earnest journey I'd ever witnessed. 6 feet of linoleum transformed into an epic pilgrimage. The pup stumbled over its own paws twice, recovered with undignified wiggles, and nearly collided with the door frame before finally bursting into the sunlight. The mother dog hadn't moved. Her ears flattened slightly as the pup tumbled down the porch steps in a whirl of over-enthusiastic limbs, but otherwise she remained statue still. Only her eyes tracked its progress, dark, unreadable pools that missed nothing. The reunion wasn't what I expected. No dramatic leaps, no joyful barks. The pup skidded to a halt just inches from its mother, its entire body quivering with barely contained excitement. For one suspended heartbeat, they simply looked at each other, the pup panting with exertion, the mother breathing slow and measured. Then, a single lick. The mother's tongue moved with surgical precision, swiping once across the pup's muzzle in a gesture so fleeting I might have missed it if I'd blinked. The pup froze, its eyes slipping shut in unmistakable bliss. I found myself leaning forward, my fingers tightening around the coffee mug. This was it. The moment she'd take back what was hers. The moment this strange interlude would end. But then, a nudge. Not rough, but firm. The mother's nose pressed against the pup's shoulder, steering it back toward the house, back toward me. The pup resisted at first, twisting to lick at her jaw, but the mother was insistent. Another nudge, more forceful this time. The pup's ears drooped. It whined, a sound so small and wounded it made my throat tighten. But the mother didn't relent. She took a single step backward, putting distance between them, her gaze lifting from the pup to the open doorway. To me. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. This wasn't rejection. This was trust. The pup hesitated, torn between two worlds, before finally turning with heartbreaking slowness toward the house. Toward safety. Toward the human who had somehow become part of its story. I didn't realize I'd moved until I found myself crouched in the doorway, one hand extended. The pup broke into an ungainly run at the sight, its temporary sorrow forgotten in the joy of reunion. It barreled into my chest with enough force to knock me back on my heels, its tongue lapping at my chin as if I'd been lost for years rather than minutes. When I looked up, the mother was gone. Only the faintest swaying of ferns marked where she'd disappeared into the trees. The screen door creaked in the breeze, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the porch. The pup squirmed in my arms, already distracted by a fly buzzing near its ear. Somewhere in the woods, a branch snapped. I tightened my hold on the pup just slightly, feeling the rapid thrum of its heartbeat against mine. The test was over. And somehow, against all odds, we'd passed. The dawn air carried the crisp bite of autumn's first serious chill when I stepped onto the porch, my breath fogging in front of me as I stretched. The wooden planks creaked underfoot, their weathered surface damp with dew that soaked into my socks immediately. I was halfway through rubbing the sleep from my eyes when I saw it. A dead rabbit. Not just dead, laid with deliberate precision at the exact center of the porch, directly in front of the door. Its fur was still glossy with morning dampness, the tawny brown of its back fading to cream along its belly. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle. Just a single clean puncture at the base of its skull. The kill shot of a predator who knew exactly how to make death quick. I crouched slowly, my knees protesting the movement, and examined the offering without touching it. The body was still warm, the muscles not yet stiff with rigor mortis. It couldn't have been there more than an hour. My gaze automatically swept the clearing. No paw prints in the dew-damp earth. No broken branches or disturbed foliage along the tree line. No rustling in the underbrush. Just the usual chorus of waking birds and the distant chatter of squirrels going about their morning routines. Behind me, the pup let out a soft woof against the screen door, its nose working furiously at the gap along the bottom. I didn't need to look to know its ears would be pricked forward. its entire body quivering with the intensity of its focus. The rabbit's scent would be overwhelming to those sensitive nostrils, rich with blood and wildness, and something far more primal than the kibble I'd been feeding it. I pushed open the screen door just enough to let the pup squeeze through. It practically tumbled over itself in its haste, skidding to a halt mere inches from the rabbit. For a long moment it simply stood there, its small body rigid with some emotion I couldn't name. Its nose twitched violently, drinking in the scent, but it made no move to touch the gift. Then, a whine. Not the high-pitched yelp it made when hungry, or the playful growls it used during our tug-of-war games with old socks. This was something deeper, more guttural, a sound that seemed to rise from its very core and vibrate in the air between us. The pup's gaze lifted from the rabbit to the tree line, its ears rotating forward like satellite dishes tuning into some frequency only it could hear. I followed its stare, scanning the shadows between the pines, but saw nothing. Yet the pup clearly did. Its tail began to wag, slow at first, then with increasing enthusiasm, until its entire back end was wiggling with the motion. It took 2 hesitant steps forward, paused, then let out a single sharp bark that echoed through the quiet morning. Still nothing moved in the trees. The pup's whine returned, softer now, almost questioning. It circled the rabbit once, twice, its nose occasionally dipping to brush the fur but never lingering. When it finally sat, it did so with its body angled toward the forest, its attention never wavering from some fixed point in the distance. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my lungs began to burn. The scene before me, the perfect rabbit, the attentive pup, the silent forest, felt like a painting suspended in time. A moment so fragile that the slightest disturbance might shatter it entirely. So I didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched as the pup finally lay down, curling itself around the rabbit without ever touching it, its chin resting on its paws as it continued to stare into the woods. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't food. This was proof. Proof that she was still out there. Proof that she was watching. Proof that, in her own wild way, she trusted me enough to care for what she'd left behind. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, but neither the pup nor I moved from our vigil. Somewhere beyond the trees, hidden in the dappled shadows, a mother kept her distance. And on my porch, her gift lay untouched, a silent testament to the bond that connected us all. The vet's office smelled of antiseptic and nervous animals, a clinical odor that made the pup press its entire body against my legs the moment we stepped inside. Its nose worked overtime, whiskers twitching at the barrage of unfamiliar scents. Alcohol wipes, flea shampoo, the underlying musk of countless creatures who had passed through these doors in various states of distress. "Well, look who's all grown up," Dr. Chen said as she knelt, her purple scrubs rustling. The pup remembered her scent from previous visits, and tentatively wagged its tail, though it kept one paw firmly planted on my boot. The examination passed in a blur of practiced motions. The cold stethoscope, the probing fingers checking joints, the bright light shone into uncooperative eyes. The pup endured it all with remarkable patience, though its gaze kept darting to the door, as if expecting someone to walk through at any moment. When Dr. Chen finally straightened, her expression was unreadable. She peeled off her gloves with a snap. "She's healthy," she said, scratching behind the pup's ears. "Miraculously so, given how she came to you. But," her hand stilled, "she'll always be different." The words hung between us, heavier than they should have been. I knew what she meant. It wasn't just the physical scars, the faint ridge along the pup's hind leg where teeth had once torn flesh, the notch missing from one ear. It was the way the pup moved through the world, caught between two realities. Too domesticated to be wild, too wild to ever be fully domesticated. The ride home was quiet. The pup sat upright in the passenger seat, its nose pressed to the crack in the window, drinking in the passing scents of pine and damp earth. As we turned onto the final stretch of dirt road leading home, its entire body tensed, ears swiveling forward like radar dishes locking onto a signal. I barely had the truck in park before the pup was whining at the door, its claws scrabbling against the vinyl seat. The moment I opened it, the pup launched itself out in a tangle of limbs, hitting the ground running. I expected it to bound toward the house, to its food bowl, or the pile of old socks it had claimed as toys. Instead, it streaked past all of them, heading straight for the gnarled oak at the edge of the clearing, the exact spot where its mother had last stood watching us. The change was immediate. The pup's playful gallop slowed to a careful walk, then stopped altogether. Its nose dropped to the ground, sniffing intently at some invisible trail. A full-body shiver ran through it, from whiskers to tail. Then it sat. Just sat. No barking. No searching. Just sat perfectly still, its gaze fixed on the tree line where the shadows pooled thickest between the pines. Its ears were pricked so far forward they nearly touched at the tips, its chest barely moving with each shallow breath. Minutes passed. The afternoon sun slanted through the branches, dappling the pup's coat with shifting patterns of light and shadow. A breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the scent of loam and late-blooming wildflowers. Still, the pup didn't move. I found myself holding my breath, caught in the spell of that perfect stillness. There was something sacred in the moment, something that demanded silence. The pup wasn't waiting for a return that might never come. It was communing with an absence that had become its own kind of presence. When the pup finally rose, it did so with a quiet sigh, its tail giving one slow wag before it turned and trotted back to where I stood. It didn't look back at the trees as it brushed past my legs, heading toward the house with the quiet assurance of an animal that had found what it was looking for. The screen door creaked as the pup nudged it open with its nose, disappearing into the dim interior. From inside came the familiar sounds of claws on hardwood, the rattle of the water bowl, the contented grunt as it settled onto its favorite patch of sunlight. Normal sounds. Home sounds. I lingered a moment longer, studying the spot beneath the oak where the pup had sat. The grass there was slightly flattened, the only evidence of the vigil that had just taken place. Somewhere beyond the trees, a branch cracked. I didn't turn to look. Didn't need to. The goodbye hadn't been for me. And as the screen door clicked shut behind me, I realized with sudden clarity, it hadn't really been a goodbye at all. The first time it happened, I mistook it for the wind. A whisper of sound against the door, not the sharp rap of branches or the scuttle of raccoons searching for scraps. Something softer, more deliberate. The kind of noise that slips beneath the skin and lingers in the bones long after it's gone. I lay frozen in the dark, the cabin's silence pressing against my eardrums like deep water. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 2:37 a.m. in angry red numerals. Outside, the moon hung heavy and full, its silver light filtering through the curtains to paint ghostly shapes across the floorboards. Then, scrape. Not loud, not threatening. Just there. The barest suggestion of something moving against the weathered wood of the front porch. Beside the bed, the pup lifted its head. No barking, no growling. Just that sudden, perfect stillness that wild things have when they sense a presence beyond human perception. Its ears swiveled forward, nostrils flaring as it sampled the air currents drifting beneath the door. I watched the rise and fall of its ribs accelerate, saw the way its pupils dilated until they swallowed the warm brown of its irises. But it didn't move toward the door, didn't whine to be let out, just listened. The seconds stretched like taffy, each one thicker and sweeter than the last. Somewhere beyond the walls, the night held its breath. Then, a sigh. Not human. Not canine either, but something in between. The exhalation of a creature caught between worlds. The sound rippled through the cabin, raising the fine hairs along my arms despite the quilt's warmth. The pup's tail thumped once against the floor. Just once. A quiet, private acknowledgement. By the time I found the courage to peel back the covers and creep to the window, the porch was empty. No footprints marred the dusting of frost on the planks. No shadow lurked in the moonlit clearing. But the pup knew. It always knew. As I returned to bed, it shifted to press its warm body against my ankles, its chin resting on my foot, with a weight that felt like both comfort and covenant. Its ears remained pricked, its gaze fixed on some point beyond the walls that only it could see. We didn't sleep the rest of that night, just lay there together, listening to the silence between the scrapes, the language of something that couldn't stay but would never truly leave. And when dawn finally painted the sky in shades of rose and amber, the pup sighed deeply and closed its eyes at last, secure in the knowledge that some bonds transcend closed doors and daylight hours. The shadow would return. It always did. The pup has claimed the foot of my bed as her own, carving out a nest from the tangled blankets and flattened pillows. Moonlight spills through the half-drawn curtains, painting silver streaks across her brindle coat as she dreams. Her paws twitch in some canine fantasy, her whiskers trembling with silent barks. I watch the rise and fall of her ribs, the way her breath comes slow and even now, so different from the shallow gasps of that first night on the porch. But it's the daylight hours that reveal the truth. Mornings begin with the usual rituals, the stretch and yawn, the enthusiastic lapping from her water bowl, the frantic circling before relieving herself in her designated patch of yard. Yet as the sun climbs higher, she often abandons her toys mid-chew to trot to the western window, the one that overlooks the dense thicket where the tree line grows wild and untamed. She doesn't whine, doesn't scratch at the glass, just watches. Today is one of those days. I find her there at high noon, her forepaws balanced on the windowsill, her nose leaving foggy circles on the glass. The sunlight turns her fur to molten copper, highlighting the scars that will never fully fade. The notch in her ear, the thin white line along her haunch. Her entire body is motionless except for the occasional twitch of her nostrils as she samples scents I can't perceive. I bring my coffee and settle into the armchair nearby, content to observe this daily pilgrimage. The pup acknowledges me with a flick of her tail before returning her attention to the woods. There's a quiet intensity in her gaze, a focus that transcends simple curiosity. She's listening to something beyond human hearing, watching movements too subtle for my eyes to catch. Hours pass this way. The sun completes its slow arc across the sky, the shadows lengthening and shifting like living things. My coffee grows cold, forgotten on the side table. Still the pup remains at her post, her vigil unbroken even as the muscles in her hind legs begin to tremble with fatigue. It would be easy to mistake this for longing, for some childish hope that her mother might come trotting out of the trees if she waits long enough. But I know better now. The truth lives in the details. The way her ears perk at a certain angle when the wind shifts from the north. The particular cadence of her breathing when the jays fall silent in the late afternoon. The single, deliberate lick she gives to the window pane just as twilight begins to paint the world in shades of violet and gold. A ritual that feels suspiciously like a blessing. She's not waiting. She's remembering. And in that remembering, she's keeping alive something that most would say is already gone. I don't have the heart to tell her what I've known since the morning I found those perfect rabbit carcasses on the porch. What the deputy confirmed when she quietly mentioned that no one had seen the junkyard bitch in months. What the empty spaces between the pup's barks have been shouting all along. Some bonds don't break, they just change shape. The pup finally abandons her post as the first stars appear, stretching with an audible pop of joints, before padding over to press her cold nose against my knee. Her eyes, when they meet mine, hold no sadness, just a quiet understanding that needs no words. As I ruffle the fur between her ears, we both pretend not to hear the distant rustle in the underbrush. The one that comes every night at this exact hour. The one that sounds suspiciously like a mother's footsteps circling the place where her child sleeps safe and loved. We don't speak of these things. We don't need to. The truth has always lived in the silence between us.